All right. Welcome, Light the Way family. Um, my name is Erica, and I'm happy to finally be able to connect with you guys. I was supposed to connect last month, but had some technical difficulties, but now we have it all squared away. So I'm happy to be able to join and be here with you guys and talk to you about something that's very near and dear to my heart: nurturing mental health in ministry. And I know this topic doesn't really cover or help anyone, everyone. Not all of us are youth leaders, or I don't know what happened. I can't. Not all of us are youth leaders. Not all of us have, you know, uh, worked in churches and everything. But I think that it is still an important topic that we can learn about, because it is important to just create opportunity for conversation about what I'm going to talk about. So let's start with welcome. And I am a marriage and family therapist. So I see couples, I see families, teens, kids. My heart is with families and couples. And I wasn't always a therapist. Part of my life I was a teacher, and I also worked a lot in children's ministry. And I felt like there was just this gap in the churches when it came to mental health and helping those kids and helping them understand what was going up as they were developing, what they were feeling when there was trauma and stress in their lives. How did they manage it? So that was part of my why I wanted to become a therapist, because I wanted to help where I felt helpless. I wanted to help where I was like, I don't know what to do with this group that I am in charge of. I don't know what to do with these kids. I want to be able to help them more. So part of my journey, uh, as for becoming a therapist, was this ministry, and wanting to help and wanting to reach those kids and give them hope. Um, so I really believe that youth leaders, teachers, Sunday school teachers, ministry helpers, volunteers play such an important role with our kids, teens, and young adults. And even, with our elderly. So I think anyone that has the opportunity to speak life, influence someone, they are at a vulnerable place in a person's life where they can provide something really important for that person, and it's safety, and it's information, and helping them find the hope and healing that they need. You might be one of the first ones to hear about the stress and the distress in someone's life. You might be, as a leader, a teacher, um, a ministry volunteer person, you might be one of the first ones to see the first signs of depression, anxiety, cutting, abuse. And when you're not equipped, or you're not providing that safe place for that person, the opportunity to help them could pass you. And it could either get worse, and you don't want to think of, other scenarios that could have happened. So I see, like, ministry leaders and church workers, volunteers, Sunday school teachers as triage. You get to go in, you get to see it. They'll usually come to you first, because that's you guys make them feel seen and heard and loved. So they'll probably open up to you first. So you're like triage. You get to see, and you get to see what's really happening, and then you get to decide, okay, what do we do next? What do they need? Where can I point them to? How can I help them? How can I, and that's your role, right? And using biblical foundation, you have the best resource right there. So today we're going to talk about what are some do's that you can do in your ministry to help your youth, children, even adults? And what are some don'ts? What are some misconceptions that we're having that, we probably shouldn't do that? Okay. So the first do is create a mental health friendly environment. And this is, so general, and it's just like, well, how do we do that? And your biggest resource, your Bible, it's filled with emotion, with feelings, and all those wonderful things that we could really relate to. We can think of, Bible characters that have gone through all these mental health issues where, David, he felt despair, he felt fear, depression, shame. Elijah felt discouraged, afraid. Jonah felt angry. Job felt grief. And we all could relate to those emotions. So, using the best resource that we have, the Bible, we can help these kids and these teens see those beautiful stories and feel so seen. Like, oh, wow, I get angry too. I feel sad too. So, using the Bible to help connect that emotional wealth that we have there and connect it to your audience, your students, your adults, and just kind of have them see that God created us emotional beings. God created us fearfully and wonderfully made, with our up and downs, our sadness, our anger. And He knew what He was creating. And He gave us resources to help us manage those emotions. So in this, this opportunity that you have to help those kids feel seen, because I could imagine kids going into youth group and afraid of admitting that they're scared, angry, anxious, because most of the time, sometimes what kids hear and teens and as they're developing is, oh, you shouldn't feel that. That's no reason to be angry. That's no reason to be sad. It's fine. You'll be fine, right? So then they're already taught that their emotions are minimized, that their emotions are exaggerated. So they stop losing trust in what they feel, and they don't know what to do with it. So they suppress, until they explode. And then that's when, you get those conflicts with parents, or even, youth with youth, that, they're fighting with their friends, or they yell at someone. It's because we tend to hold back our emotions instead of releasing and say, hey, what you said really hurt my feelings. And then the other person validating it, they just hold it back. So creating an environment where you're using the Bible as your reference, as your foundation of where our emotions came from, how to manage them, how to use them. God gave us all the emotions. God said, you can be angry, but don't act out in your anger. So what can you do with your anger? Well, let's see what the Bible says about anger. What can we do? So you have so many resources there: sadness, grief, happiness, all those emotions that are in the Bible. What can we do with those beautiful emotions that God gave us? So as we, create this environment, kids will feel more comfortable talking about their emotions. They won't be scared of them, which will create an emotionally intelligent person, a person that could take their emotion and feel it, accept it, and decide what to do with it, not feel shame, and not try to hide it, but express it in a way that is safe and respectful and loving to others. So we want to create that. We want to create a nurturing environment that accepts those emotions, that mental health. Talk about anxiety, talk about depression, talk about sadness, talk about fear, talk about worry. it's they're going to experience it anyway, whether we talk about it or not. But by getting ahead of it, we are giving them a biblical foundation on how to manage those issues in a healthy biblical way. Another one to do is develop protocols with your team. So with your, all the way to the tippy top with your pastors and the leadership, all the way to the bottom with your volunteers. What do you do? So you have so many different scenarios of even to how do you manage arguments within your group? How do you remain neutral? How do you help them manage their emotions and using the biblical principles of, yes, I could see how you got angry. I understand, but could we figure out a different way to express that anger and not yell? So even coaching your staff on how to manage that, remaining neutral, not taking sides, and not judging, because that could cause a lot of harm when churches start, leaders start polarizing themselves on either side and deciding and judging on who's right or who's wrong. And then that could start creating friction within the group. But when the volunteers, the members, the staff remain neutral, when they help and they help the kids, the youth, everyone just figure out that middle ground and teach them biblical principles of respect, love, honor, not being judgmental, you can foster that safe place for everyone to just learn how to get along biblically. So we have even those protocols. How do you manage arguments? How do you manage, division in your group? How do you manage cliques? How do you manage all of those things? And developing those protocols on what to do. But now you have those other more like dangerous behaviors like cutting. What is your volunteer going to do when he or she discovers that one of your students are cutting? What are you going to do when your youth calls you and says, hey, I just swallowed a bunch of pills, I don't want to live anymore, versus I'm thinking of swallowing a bunch of pills because I don't want to live anymore. What are your protocols? What do you do first? Who do you call first? How do you find them help? How do you have a resource already? When do you involve the parents? Those are all important information that as church members, we need to have. We need to know and not try to figure it out as it comes, because while we're trying to figure it out, that youth or that person is still in despair, still hurting. And as they're waiting for you to figure out what to do, they might take the next step and it might be too late. So you want to have that already in place. Create the protocols for response and escalation. When do you take it to the next level? When do you involve the parents? When do you involve higher staff members? And when do you start getting help for these individuals? When do you say like, okay, they need to go to the hospital, they need to see a therapist, this is what we think, here are respected therapists that we believe can help in this way, here a psychiatrist. So whatever it is, you already have that set, so you're acting upon it. There's no waiting until things could get deeper and more dangerous for that person. You're going to be exposed sometimes as youth leaders and adults, whether you're working with adults or kids, sometimes a lot of the issues that you're exposed to will trigger you in some way. So I think it's important that as a leader, staff, volunteer, that you seek your own help to manage some of those unresolved issues that may be triggered with those kids or youth. So if they're talking about their parents and you have unresolved issues with your parents, if they're talking about abuse and you have unresolved issues with abuse, you're going to be triggered. And it might cause you to respond in a personal manner and not in a non-biased what is best for this person at that moment. And you might be responding out of fear, hurt, resentment, and not out of what is the biblical way to respond for this person. So it is important that we really treat ourselves and we really are careful, where are we responding from? Because yes, it is, we're human, we are going to feel it, our past will come forward and will, you know, that's how we see the world, and it will trigger us and it will cause us to respond in that manner. So we want to be very careful of that, because we don't want to lead someone down a path and to respond a certain way because maybe we felt we should have responded that way, or we felt hopeless as a child and now we're just like, no, you need to just leave the house, do this, and then we're giving them advice that maybe wasn't the best. So really resolve your issues as well when you're working with youth, adults, kids, because you don't want to be leading from a place of fear, pain, and resentment. So, what not to do? There's so many things. There's more of what we can do. And I could always come, to your church, and we could always get more into depth, of how is it that church leaders can help, their kids and their, ministries thrive in this area. But let's go into what not to do. And one of the biggest issues is, do not blame mental health issues on lack of spirituality. I'm going back to putting ourselves in a place of judgment, right? Could their mental health issues be because of their disconnect? They're not reading the Bible, they're not praying. Yes. Emotions are emotions, not indicator of spiritual health, though. Right? When I'm sad, we had Jesus that was sad. We had David that was sad. We had, we can be sad, right? So our emotions are emotions. Our emotions are meant to change. There's moments where we feel really sad. We get a memory. Someone says something mean to us. We're going to feel really sad. We do something that's really traumatic. We grieve. We go through something that is going to cause us to feel sadness, and it might be a prolonged sadness because that's how great the pain was. And it doesn't mean that we lack spirituality. Or even with depression, where it's this deep sadness and darkness that people feel, there are people that feel so alone, so sad. But the one thing that they could hold on to is God. And they know that God is there. And I could give my own personal account of a time where I was going through a really depressed state. And as dark as and lonely as I felt, the one thing I kept saying is, God, I know I have faith that you're with me, even though I don't feel you at this moment. And I would make sure I read my Bible. I would make sure that I prayed and talked to God. But it was just this deep sadness that I had in me until I resolved certain issues that were bothering me and certain issues that were keeping me there. So, yes, my sadness was not an indicator of my lack of spirituality. And sometimes we judge people and we say, well, you're not praying enough. And I could tell you how disheartening that could be for someone that's struggling with mental health, to be told that you're not doing something enough, because sometimes they feel like they are doing it, and they're just like, I'm doing what I am capable of doing at this moment, and you're asking me to do more when I don't know if I could even get through the next 5 minutes. So I caution you to really use your words carefully when you're encouraging the person to pray and to maintain their faith and to read their Bible in the midst of their darkness, in the midst of their pain, in the midst of their grief, in the midst of everything. To not use it as an indicator of their spiritual fitness. Another to not to do is not to blame or shame. So you may hear someone say, "Oh, you know, I'm so depressed. I'm this, I'm that, right?" And then, well, if you didn't do this, you wouldn't feel that way. Well, if you didn't do make that choice, or if you didn't do that, right? And you know what? A lot of the times, yeah, it's actions, the consequences of our own actions, right? So if a teenager disrespects their parents and then they get upset and then they get punished and and yeah, of course they're gonna feel sad, upset, and then it just starts rolling down into something bigger. Yes. But even if the action was something that we brought it upon ourselves, that shaming and blaming isn't helpful, but we could validate that feeling. Wow, I'm really sorry that you feel sad. I get it. I get that. I would feel frustrated too. And we could validate that. There's power in validating, because then we make ourselves a safe place for that person to talk to, and we could leave them back, into the Bible, without using the Bible to smack them around and bring them, we think like just throwing Bible verses, well, you should do this, or, the Bible says this, or, well, if you didn't do this, right? So we want to be very careful with how we're using the Bible. We don't want to blame or shame, because God didn't do that with us, right? So we don't want to do that with our kids. We want our kids to not look at God and the grace that Jesus gave us with fear and shame. We want to come before God and say, look, I did this and I did this wrong. Can you forgive me? But because others have shamed us so much, that we are interpreting that God and Jesus see us the same way. So be careful not to blame or shame our students, our kids, our adults that are having mental health issues, because their sadness, sometimes they can't help that fear that they have that seems so irrational to you, and you're just like, I don't understand it, like it doesn't make sense. You just don't have enough faith. God's not going to do that. Like, why do you think that's going to happen? Like, you just don't have faith that God is in control. We're coming like that shame, that judgment, and it's just unhelpful. You could be right. You could be right in your words. You could be right in what your intention is, but it is not edifying to that person in that moment. So when you soften yourself up and you lead with grace and you use the Bible with love, we're able to come and join that person in their pain and their suffering, and holding their hand back to whatever biblical truth you were trying to teach them, but with gentleness and love and grace. And so I encourage you to don't blame their lack of spirituality for, because they have a mental illness, or they're feeling depressed, or there's grief. And don't blame or shame, and even in, taking sides, sometimes we could blame, oh, your parents, yeah, your parents are awful. How can they say that to you? And it's so easy for us to do that. So those are, I think I gave 3 and 2 tips on what to do and what not to do in ministry. If you want to hear more, reach out. We can definitely set up something and give you guys more on how to nurture mental health in your ministry. And if you're not in ministry, you're not in church, even practicing some of these in with your kids, mentioning more mental health, mentioning, times that you felt sad, times that you felt fear. We all experience it. And so even bringing it up can help us your kids, your students, anyone just feels safe about talking about how they feel, and they don't have to stuff it and hide it until they explode. I do want to mention some challenges that teens are facing. Okay, so right now we have depression, anxiety, bullying, cutting, abuse, divorce, low self esteem, trauma, and a lot of them that experience COVID. That's a lot for these teens and kids to be experiencing at this time. It is, if you could imagine, like, you as an adult feeling this, can you imagine like a 7-year old, 8-year old, 9-year old, 10-year old, seeing these things happening to them, parents with abuse, the bullying and everything. So in school where they're supposed to feel safe, they're doing lockdown drills and active shooter drills. They're in an environment where it's performance driven. So a lot of kids develop perfectionism. Then you have undiagnosed learning disabilities like ADHD, autism, um, and then you have your diagnosed disabilities and the pressure to perform and succeed. And sometimes these kids do not have wiggle room for mistakes. They are, checked at the door like, no, don't do that. You can't do that. There's no grace. So we have a lot of issues that kids are facing. When you think you're at school, you're relaxed and your body is relaxed, and then all of a sudden this alarm goes off and you're supposed to hide. You know how long it takes for your body to go back to calm after it's, after their fight, flight, or freeze gets activated, and they might not understand what's going on in their body. Like, why is their tummy turning, and why are all of a sudden they're sweating, and their heart is racing, and it just feels so scary. Yeah, that's happening to them at school, and then they're expected to just go back to normal, go back to class, sit down, not knowing when the alarm might go off again, not knowing when someone might come into their school. It's scary for them. So these kids do have these emotions. They have these feelings, and we want to be gentle. We want to be accepting, and we want to be loving and careful. And what a best place than church to make a safe place for these kids as we're teaching them, leading them, and showing them the grace of God at church, and accepting their emotions where they're at, and helping them manage them. So I want to encourage you, leaders, teachers, volunteers, staff, anyone that works with children, adults, teens, to just create a nurturing environment for mental health, for students and kids to just really have their emotions, for them to be able to like express their emotions. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you could put them in comments. We'll make sure to get back to you. You could always reach out to us at our website, lightthewaycounseling.com. We are on Facebook and Instagram, and here on YouTube as well. There's other videos that you can watch. If there is anything else you need, please reach out to us. We're here. Thank you.